Good evening again, everyone, and welcome. My name is Lori Luciola, and I am the co-chair of the CUPE Ontario Women's Committee. I'm so pleased to be your co-host for this evening for the 9th webisode of CUPE Connects, undervaluing care work and unmasking gender inequality. We are coming together today from our homes in all places all across this land we call Canada. In honoring the ability to gather, we recognize the First Nations, Métis, and Inuit peoples who have inhabited and care for this land for many millennia. Part of each of our reconciliation efforts compels us to know and understand our colonialist history, the devastating destruction it has caused, and the ways it continues to damage the lives of so many. During this COVID-19 pandemic, we witnessed an even clearer view of the disparities in our shared space and work diligently each day to ensure the prosperity of all peoples. The ongoing violence against Indigenous peoples asserting their rights must stop, as well as justice for murdered and missing Indigenous women and girls.
So necessary for justice for murdered and missing Indigenous girls and women everywhere. Hi, everyone. I'm Tiffany Balducci. I'll be your co-host this evening. So pleased to be part of this excellent webisode of CUPE Connects. I'm also the 4th Vice President of CUPE Ontario. Today is International Women's Day, and we know that women and those who suffer and are oppressed under the material conditions that have been historically assigned to women, which includes trans and non-binary people, intersex, agender, and queer people, have also been the front lines across the province, continuing to risk their lives to keep people safe and to keep services running for the good of the public. They've been balancing work, raising children, helping with virtual school, and have had to make sacrifices that often were not asked of their counterparts. We know that COVID-19 isn't the only pandemic we're fighting, and we know that this pandemic does not fall evenly on all women. In a time when we need to invest in our public services, we are facing cutbacks from the Ford government and an agenda of privatization that will leave women and marginalized people further and further behind. But the path to recovery does not have to be that way. What is traditionally considered women's work has been undervalued for years. And why is that? And what can we do to address this as a union and beyond? So let's kick it off with a panel to discuss just that.
Thanks so much, Tiffany. We are so pleased to be joined by CUPE Ontario Secretary Treasurer Candice Rennick this evening. I love doing this part because she's kind of like a neighbor to me. Born and raised in Peterborough, Ontario, Candice Rennick has been a member of CUPE since she began working at a local long-term care facility when she was 16 years old. Becoming a local union steward and bargaining committee member at the age of 19, Candice was elected the president of CUPE Local 2280 at 22 years of age, a position she held for 7 years. Candice was first elected to the CUPE Ontario Executive Board in 2002, where she served four terms as a vice president. In 2010, Candice made history when she was elected Secretary Treasurer of CUPE Ontario, the province's largest union, becoming the first woman and the youngest person ever elected to the position. Candice is also a regional vice president on the CUPE National Executive Board, a position she has held since 2003. During her time on the CUPE National Executive Board, Candice has served on a number of national committees, as well as representing CUPE internationally with the union's global partner, the Public Service International. We're also very excited to be joined by frontline worker and PSW, Connie Nouveau. Connie is the president of CUPE Local 7797, an active member of CUPE for nearly 20 years. Prior to becoming president of her local, she was a chief steward, a vice president, bargaining committee member, health and safety rep, and currently she is a member of the CUPE Ontario Racial Justice Committee and the Home Care Rep on HCWCC. Connie has spent most of her union time advocating for change in home care, fighting government underfunding, and of course, neglect.
Wow, what an amazing lineup so far. Thanks, Lori. We're also very happy to be joined by Angela McEwen, who is our CUPE National Economist, and is a senior economist at CUPE National, and a policy fellow with the Broadbent Institute. Her primary focus is understanding precarity and inequality in the Canadian labor market. She also studies the impacts of Canadian economic and social policy on workers, especially climate policy and international trade and investment treaties. Angela writes a quarterly publication for CUPE members, Economy at Work. She holds an MA in economics from Dalhousie University. And lastly, but not leastly, joining us this evening is Leila Meskin. Leila arrived in Canada from Morocco in 2017 to complete her MA in mathematics at Brock University. She soon started getting involved with her CUPE local 4207 to learn and fight and stand up for workers in her sector. Leila was elected as vice president for her local in 2018 and was the first worker of color to sit on the executive board and take active roles with various committees. She was on the bargaining committee of her 1200 unit, where they recently reached a deal with the employer. Congratulations. Leila is a delegate to the Niagara District CUPE Council and a delegate to the Niagara Regional Labor Council. At the provincial level, she sits on the CUPE Ontario Women's Committee as a young worker representative and on the Ontario University Workers Coordinating Committee, also known as OUWCC, as a migrant rights worker representative to advocate for the rights of women, young workers, migrant workers, and voice their struggles and concerns.
Thanks, Tiffany. So let's jump in. We have so many questions on this important subject matter that we've grouped them into themes to try to cover the main issues.
Great. So starting with you, Candace, unmasking gender inequity in long-term care. You have been on the front line fighting for dignity and respect for care workers, specifically in long-term care for decades. Can you tell us about some of the system and government failures that have led to this reality for so many working women in long-term care?
For sure. First of all, let me say happy International Women's Day to everybody. Thank you for joining, and really such an important question and an important topic. Happy to be here with you all this evening. You know, there have been so many system and government failures that have contributed to the horrendous crisis in long-term care during the pandemic. But essentially, what we're experiencing is consequences of long-standing, persistent, and deliberate neglect by governments for decades. Governments, both provincial and federal governments, have refused to acknowledge that universal access to high-quality long-term care is a human right, and they have refused to publicly fund and operate long-term care as a public service. And because of this, long-term care in Ontario and across the country has been grossly under-resourced, it has been poorly regulated, and often unavailable and unaffordable for people who need it. Long-term care facilities were inadequate, they were overcrowded, and in many respects unsafe before the pandemic. The almost exclusively women long-term care workforce, including a large number of racialized women, have faced multiple forms of exploitation for many, many years. They are underpaid, they are undervalued, they're overworked, they are frequently harassed, and they are subject to many forms of violence. And many are hired on a part-time and casual basis, forcing them to work in multiple facilities to make ends meet for their family. And in almost all cases, these part-time and casual workers get inferior pay, no benefits, and their precarious employment makes them much more vulnerable to all kinds of unfair and abusive treatment. Secondly, and directly related to the first point, governments rely on and fund private for-profit long-term care for providers to deliver long-term care. And in order to maximize their returns, they are cutting corners. They are keeping staffing levels at dangerously low levels, and they're lobbying hard against any and all attempts to raise care standards. And they push back hard against pay and benefit improvements, forcing a high turnover of staff, which absolutely undermines the quality of care. So, that there were high rates of infection and death in long-term care should not come to a surprise to anyone. The living and working conditions by government's own design made it so difficult to keep infection out or to contain the spread. They were pre-existing conditions. And the disproportionate impact on women, including racialized women, was absolutely inevitable. It is a low-wage sector, and it is a sector that it is a sector that relies on the exploitation of women. And all sectors of the economy that depend on low-wage labor are most likely to be women-dominated sectors with a lot of racialized people. So that is not a coincidence, that is not an accident, and this is something that we have to discuss and address. The only silver lining here is that because the situation was caused by government policy, it can be fixed by changes in government policy. And we know what must be done. Governments must treat long-term care as a human right, and they must make long-term care a fully nonprofit and universal service. Thankfully, long-term care, properly, they have to improve the infrastructure. They have to allow for decent and proper staffing levels and improvements in benefits. And all of this will make it easier to recruit and retain workers, and it will raise the quality of life for residents. It is the only way to end this gross exploitation of women working in the sector, and it is the only way to ensure to ensure that we preserve the dignity of the residents. I think that answers your question. I'll leave it there for now.
Great, thank you, Candace. I remember way back my first convention hearing you speak about this, and still we have to speak about this. Thank you so much for that important information. Next up is a question for Connie. One of the things that we are exploring tonight is care work and how it's undervalued. As a personal support worker, what is it like on the front lines? What would you like society to know about your work?
Thank you, and good evening, everybody. My name is Connie. I'm a personal support worker on the front line, and I just want to say Happy International Women's Day. It is the women's voices that today propel me to speak and tell you how it's been like working in the front line, especially in home care. The pandemic hasn't made it easier, but the pandemic has exposed the gross negligence of the system in home care. It's been very difficult to go to work, and you still have to work 1 hour, and you are rushing and trying to keep yourself safe. Our clients in the community, they don't have the masks. So you go in there, you wear your own mask that you also have to keep for the next client. We've got only 2 masks per day, and sometimes you don't have face shields. So it's been very difficult. And again, the government didn't make it any easier for us. And I want to remind you about the first wave of the pandemic, where the whole city of Toronto was shut down. The Premier forgot about the home care PSWs. We had nowhere to sit, to have our lunch, or even washrooms to go to, because everything was shut down. The parks were closed as well. If you're walking around, you are seen as loitering. So it's just been very difficult. But I want to let the society know that, this is work that is done by women. And for women who are working in this sector, it's not only a women issue, gender issue, it's also a race issue, because most of people work in home care are predominantly women of color who came to this country as immigrants, but also who came for greener pastures to try and make our lives better. But it's just been horrible. The pandemic has shown everybody how much we are paid in home care, underpaid, undervalued, not even recognized during this time. Yes, we're called heroes way after PSWs, maybe in long-term care or hospitals, we're called heroes. We're the last one on the list to be recognized of the important work that we do. We look after seniors who are old and frail, who live in their homes in isolation. They can't help themselves. They depend on me, Connie, to go and give them care every day, change their diaper, provide them with meal, medication. They cannot do these things by themselves. But it doesn't help when the sector is so severely underfunded. When you're dealing with someone who's old and frail, you cannot meet all their needs within an hour. But I also want to remind you, and what we need to know, is that when the pandemic hit, the regulations said we can only work for one employer, which means that the other jobs that we have to have as home care PSWs, we had to stop working those multiple jobs because of the rules around the pandemic. But what did that mean? It also meant that we were plunged deep into poverty because one job alone cannot help us take care of ourselves, cannot sustain us. The wages are very low. The hours of work are not guaranteed. You have 4 or 5 hours a week, or maybe 10 hours a week to a maximum of 20 hours bi-weekly. These are the things that we've been talking about, but the pandemic has exposed. So I want the society to know that today, when we're crying to Doug Ford for a permanent wage increase, it's not the money that we're after. We want decent work conditions. The exploitation has to stop. It didn't have to wait for the pandemic to expose how racialized workers are exploited in home care. I want you to know that there is a people out there who depend on us, but how do we continue working in these dire straits? Many PSWs actually, when the rule came that you can only choose one employer, they've left the home care sector to try and get full-time jobs in long-term care. The home care sector is severely understaffed at the moment. But we also know that when seniors remain in their homes, they prevent going to nursing homes very quickly, and thereby, offloading the system in the long-term care of the beds and all those shortages. But how do the seniors remain in their homes when there's no funding, when there's no workers? So this is what has happened with this pandemic, but it's not the first time we've been talking about this. We've been talking about this forever. Every time when the funding comes out, home care is forgotten. It's neglected. The workers who are there are exploited. And I hope that the lessons that we have learned will help to show equality, to show that women of color who came to this country are workers too, are human beings too, and they deserve decent work. They deserve decent wages. They deserve benefits. They need to go home sick and have sick time. We didn't have a choice. From the 13th of March 2020, we remained on the front line because we have no choice. We have to go to work. The PPEs were the last ones to get them. It's never been easy, and this has made it even worse. So we are talking as women, when we are going to empower women today and forever, it starts with decent work. We can't continue to undervalue home care PSWs because the work that we do is equally important. We went to school for training. We're not volunteers. We are professionals, qualified, and we need to be treated as such. We're not just heroes that volunteer. We're heroes who need to also take care of themselves. We need to pay our bills. Thank you.
Wow. Thank you so much, Connie, for sharing not only your lived experience, but the lived experience with so many of the workers and members that you work with and those that you serve every single day. So thank you so much again for sharing that. Angela, we know that you're senior economist, you're the senior economist, sorry, at CUPE National and a policy fellow with the Broadbent Institute. We hear about a she session. What does that mean? Have women been impacted disproportionately during COVID-19? What does this look like?
Thanks, Tiffany. Yes, so normally in a recession, the first jobs that get hit are disproportionately male jobs like construction or manufacturing. But this recession was different, and a lot of it has to do with the undervaluing of care work that we just heard Connie talking about so compellingly. So first of all, women were disproportionately affected because they're more likely to work part-time jobs because they have to handle care work at home. They're more likely to work in service sector jobs, and that work is likely to be low wage because they're more likely to be undervalued, just their period. So the sectors that were hit were tourism, hotels, food service, and women disproportionately work in those areas, and so they were laid off. Second, there were the sector of workers like Connie, who were frontline workers and low-wage workers, and so they were disproportionately affected because they had to keep going to work, but nobody thought about what their needs were in terms of childcare because all of a sudden the schools were closed, right? In terms of getting to work safely, in terms of having the proper protection. And again, that's largely because these workers are undervalued to begin with. And so even though we've been talking for years about these needs and the importance of home care and how that saves us, time and money and improves our outcomes if we invest properly in that sector, we still haven't done it. And then finally, the third impact is when schools were closed or when home care workers had to leave the sector, women picked up that unpaid care work slack. And so women were, again, and this has been reported again and again in studies, it's been reported that twice as many women have actually left the labor force. They've been forced out of the labor force because they've either had to take care of children and help homeschool the children, or they've had to take care of elders who now don't have that paid support either. There's families are unwilling to put their families in danger in long-term care private facilities that maybe they would have before, and they're unable to find home care support to help them. And so those two phenomena are meaning that women are losing their employment, they're losing pensions that they're not paying into now. And if we consider the fact that a lot of those women work in jobs, if you're still working, you don't have paid sick leave. So you can't make a decision where you're able to safely stay home and be safe. You're more likely to bring the virus home to your family because you had to choose to go to work and you couldn't safely isolate. And so we've seen women be affected disproportionately in terms of the illness, in terms of the job loss, and in terms of the extra stress and the extra load that they have to carry at home.
Yeah, thanks for that, Angela. I had heard a bit about the She session, but when you put it into that perspective, I guess it really hit home at how many women have been impacted by this pandemic. So now moving on to Layla, how is it going for you and other women in academia during this pandemic? Are there gender inequities that you're finding?
Well, first of all, happy International Women's Day to all the lovely, amazing fighters, activists, and all the women of the world. It's such a pleasure to be joining you tonight. Unfortunately, Lori, academia is no different than any other sector. One of the main issues that women in my sector have been facing is related to their research falling behind. The pandemic is now squeezing the time for research productivity, and especially for caregiving women, because as you know, caregiving and femininity are so closely linked in our society. Like they're seen as natural feminine trait that is, rather than a skill that is actually acquired. So as a result, women are more likely to be asked to do this work. And kids want their mommy. Some kids have taken all of this very hard, and that emotional labor, it falls disproportionately to moms. The domestic labor does too, because as Statistics Canada report shows, they found that 61% of women do the majority of laundry, and also that 56% of meal preparations are done by women. Another report from Statistics Canada shows that women do more childcare spend more time on average with their kids and often combine parenting with other tasks, mainly homeschooling. So if they take the biggest burden on that, making sure that their kids are not falling behind on school, explaining to them what's going on in the world. Like some kids don't understand and they need that time for us to explain to them what's going on. And so the studies now already show that women have written significantly fewer papers than their male counterparts during the pandemic. So a lot of women will see a setback in their careers, where it will either take longer for them to graduate if they're working on their PhD, or it will take longer for them to get tenure for like faculty members who are on who have actually a time clock because their contract might end. Another problem is some women faced harsher student evaluations during the outbreaks. Research shows that gender bias is rampant in end-of-term evaluations with women and people of color. They're more likely than men to get comments related to their appearance or tone of voice, which we know has nothing to do with actually their ability to successfully teach. But again, this problem is not new. I remember in one of my classes, that was way before the pandemic, I received my evaluations, and there was this one comment from one of my students, and I quote, he said, "She has a very thick accent. I don't understand the word she says." And mind you, I teach mathematics, like, so it's numbers. And I remember that it didn't matter the 100 positive comments that I received. What really stuck on my mind was that, and I was actually worried, are my students able to understand me? Because I know that English is not my first language. And I remember I was asking people, I mean, I hope you guys are understanding me tonight. But yeah, like, this is not new. The issue that women in academia are now facing are not new. They are more severe versions of long-standing gender gaps that already cause universities to hemorrhage female faculty, particularly women of color, and they will require measures to go beyond institutional responses to the pandemic. I mean, if there's ever an era of the after COVID-19, work-life integration will continue to be a barrier for women's success, unfortunately, unless we begin transformative change, and right now, right away.
Wow, thank you so much for sharing your thoughts, Layla. Lots to think about and digest. And one thing we keep hearing over and over again is that this is nothing new. It's just been emphasized by the pandemic. So thank you again for sharing your thoughts on that question. Candace, you spoke about the ways in which systems, governments, and society have continued to perpetuate this devaluing of women in care roles. What are some of the things the labor movement and our own union have done to address these issues, and what more can we do to achieve change?
Thanks, Tiffany. It's a really great question. There is a long list, but I'll keep it short because I know time is limited. But I think perhaps the most important and fundamental thing that we have done as a union is to organize and to bring women into CUPE. Unionization is still one of the best ways to lift women out of poverty and to demand value for labor. You know, unions give women collective bargaining power to demand more and to get more. They provide workers a vehicle to make change. So as a union, we've made deliberate efforts to organize low-wage sectors where women are predominant. You know, but of course, there's a lot further that we could go. You know, childcare workers, for example, remain largely unorganized. There is a whole ton of work that we can and should be doing in the home care sector, which might be one of the most undervalued and unexploited classification in all of healthcare. But I would say, first and foremost, we need to be organizing unorganized workers and giving them the protection of a union. We've also pushed hard on legislative and political fronts, working with allies and coalition partners to shift government policy to benefit all women workers, not just unionized workers. I mean, the campaign underway right now for paid sick days, it's so important for women in care roles because many of them have none, and yet they are exposed more than anyone to COVID-19. They are at a higher risk of transmitting the infection because of the work that they do. They have a right not to have to go to work when they're sick or when a family member is sick, and getting paid for that is so crucial. Today, in recognition that we can't win these struggles alone, CUPE has launched a campaign aimed at the provincial government for women in healthcare, and it is a campaign that's titled Respect Us, Protect Us, Pay Us. I encourage you to visit the website to get more details about this campaign, but throughout the pandemic, this hero status has certainly not translated into better working conditions on the front line. So the Respect Us component is really about saying enough is enough. We deserve and demand to be respected in our jobs. Workers are putting their lives at risk every single day. They are going without access to proper personal protective equipment. They are subject to unacceptable levels of violence, hence the Protect Us component. Give us the adequate protection that we need to stay safe on the job. And then, of course, the Pay Us component absolutely speaks for itself. There are too many women in care roles who are making poverty level wages, and that must change. So I'm super proud that on this International Women's Day, we have launched this campaign aimed at women in healthcare called Respect Us, Protect Us, and Pay Us. If you want to be involved in that, I encourage you to visit the website to find out how. But looking ahead though, especially as we start to emerge from the pandemic, I think that we're going to have to step it up, all of us. It's impossible for anyone to deny the heavy damage that's been done to women through this pandemic. Angela talked about the economic consequences for women, and the social consequences have been horrendous, including the rise in violence against women, gender isolation, and the huge problems that we're seeing around mental health issues. The impacts on working mothers, which we don't talk about a lot, where women are expected to work like they don't have major parental responsibilities and expected to parent like they don't have enormous work obligations. It is grossly unfair, and it needs to change. But I do believe that this is a special moment in history for women to organize for change. And I think that as a union, we have a big role to play in that. I've already talked about the importance of organizing the unorganized into CUPE and into other unions, but we also have to organize the women who are already members. We should be doing so much more to coordinate efforts of care workers. This is the time for us to demand total and complete transformation of the care economy. This is time to demand that the care of others no longer be left to women to do for poverty wages or no wages at all. This is the time for us to demand an end to privatized care, to demand huge public investments in care services. And our union is powerful. We are the largest union in Canada. We have human and financial resources, and working with our partners and coalitions, with our communities, we can make this happen.
Thank you, Candace. You've given us so much to think about. Connie, regarding the pandemic, we've heard that we are all in this together, but the pandemic simply is not the same for care workers, medical professionals, and those away from the front lines, such as parents and education workers, and all different intersectionalities. What are your thoughts about this? Are we weathering this storm in different boats?
Yeah, thank you. I've actually, been thinking about this. Phrases like "we are in this together" are quite empowering. But unfortunately, this pandemic has clearly shown that care workers like PSWs like me in home care are weathering the storm in a sinking boat. Decades of neglect of home care system clearly exploded this pandemic, showing that we are not equal or treated the same as other care workers. You can agree that this week on International Women's Day celebrations, the media continues to be dominated by the desperate cries from PSWs, labor unions, employers of PSWs, and women of all stripes asking our government to immediately fix the broken system, particularly home care, by providing sustained funding, creating decent work with good wages and benefits that are comparable to PSWs working in long-term care, hospitals, or nursing homes. We are not doctors in home care. We are simply PSWs who are predominantly women of color and immigrants, but have also remained on the front line since the start of the pandemic. As our jobs, we don't have any choices to work from home and be less exposed to the coronavirus. We are weathering the storm in a sinking boat, as I say, with minimum of 2 masks per day and with no face shields at all, as I've already said. Many PSWs lost their second job and sinking to poverty even further. The $3 pandemic premium pay from Doug Ford is not helpful if it's only temporary with no full-time hours. Other people in long-term care, they have full-time hours and they have benefits, but that's not the reality in home care. As many racialized PSWs living in marginalized communities have not only lost their jobs, but they've also lost their lives during this pandemic. And some of us have actually become homeless because we can't even pay the basic needs such as rent. It's not a mental issue. It's an issue that has been created over decades of lack of funding in home care. So yes, we are weathering the same storm, but in different boats. And I think ours as home care workers, those boats are sinking. Thank you.
Well said, Connie. Well said. Thank you for that. Back to you, Angela. What can you tell us about unwaged and unpaid labor that largely falls on women and gender oppressed people? Is it a form of gendered economic oppression and an exploitation upon which capitalism rests?
I love that question because it basically answers itself. Yes, of course. And there's layers and stages, but what we see is that for a certain period of history, sometimes unions are like, oh, you know, the post-war was so great. And then women are like, and people are like, oh. So for sure, there was a period of history where the housewife took care of everything and was basically, you know, the assistant for her, you know, male partner that was successful in a firm and took care of the kids and organized fundraising and parties and stuff. So there's a lot of work that was unpaid and unwaged that used to happen in keeping communities up. If I think of my grandmothers and their work, you know, through the Women's Association with the church and organizing if something happened in anybody's family, you know, organizing the community to respond and help support other members of the community. So a lot of that work went unseen by men. And so they thought it wasn't happening and it wasn't important. And so our social safety net that grew up around this ideal of a 1950s home didn't take into account where the unpaid work was coming from. But there's actually, Armine Yalnizyan did a great little video with the National Film Board of Canada talking about the economy as a cake, and that the part of the economy that we think of, the waged economy, actually relies and rests upon public sector infrastructure. And then below that, all of it relies on the labor of mostly, as you say, women and feminine identified persons. And it's absolutely necessary for everything else to work. We all rely on somebody who relies on childcare. We all rely on home care workers taking care of our family members that need that help in the home. We all need that to happen. We all rely on high performing women that are also doing that double shift at home, right? So it's really important. It's really unseen, and it is more than just childcare. I mean, childcare would be transformative. Having affordable childcare, having free long-term care, having free home care would help. That's paid for by the state because it's a necessary part of our economy to make it work, and we all benefit when it's there. So we often think about it in terms of just childcare, but it goes well beyond that, and it's the broader spectrum of care work that deserves to be paid well. They deserve to be good, stable jobs for women that are performing them. But we also, as families who use these services, we deserve to have them be affordable. We deserve to have them be present and accessible, and we deserve to have high quality there. So I think that our economy, in a social democratic economy, you would have these things and we would be more prosperous and we would be happier and we would be better taken care of. And so I think that's really core to a healthy economy, is to be able to do that.
Oh, Angela, I think we're going to have you come as a guest panelist at the next convention for CUPE Ontario Women's Committee. Thank you so much for all of that. Layla, what are your personal reflections on gender inequity and care work this International Women's Day?
Well, Lori, we can all agree that, you know, women are at the forefront of the crisis in their work as primary caregivers, and in both the public and the private sector. They're more likely to contact the virus in their roles as caregivers, frontline health workers, those living in long-term care homes. But they also have the least say in the policy response. This has to change. It changes today. We will all be determined. It will start by getting women in most of leadership positions, pushing women to take political actions, join the parliament. We have to make, if we want a real meaningful change, we will do it. We are the only people who can make it happen. The report showed that over 90% of nurses are women, 75% of respiratory therapists, and 80% of those working in medical labs, up to 90% of the PSWs, who do the lion's share of the work in the long-term care homes and home care work in the community, are women. Over 2/3 of the people who clean, disinfect our hospitals, our schools, our office buildings, they're women. They're taking work that is labeled low-skilled, but yet we can see now that it's indispensable in our collective well-being. So right now, at this moment, COVID-19 pandemic, they originated this national recognition, at least, that we can have, that care work is essential, because when unions and social justice organizations and human rights organizations was screaming at all fronts that this is important, that care work is important, politicians were brushing them off. Now there is no one can dispute this is becoming a fact. So this recognition has brought the fractures in Canada's care infrastructure to the forefront, but entering the recovery planning phase, there is an opportunity here for us to leverage this national recognition to gain and sustain decent work for care workers and high quality care for our community in general. We can not only forestall loss of equality gains, but we can reduce social and economic barriers and advance inclusion, gender equity, and gender equality. So there is a real opportunity there, and we will take it.
Well said. Thank you for sharing, Layla, and thank you for sharing, everyone. This has just flown by. Now we have an opportunity to just check in with each of you for any final thoughts you may have on the subject. And we'll begin with Candace.
Yeah, that's gone quick. Okay, final thoughts. I guess I would say that, system failures at all levels of government serve to exploit women and keep women down. There's no question about that. And these systems, whether they're social or economic or even labor relations systems, they not only make the exploitation of women possible, they make it probable. And so we have a lot of work to do, and it absolutely starts by naming these inequities for what they are. Throughout this call, we've identified ways that women and unions can step up to make real and lasting change. But I also think that we need a fundamental cultural shift in how the public and society views and values the work that is, seen as women's care work. The care of our elderly, the care of our children, the care of the upkeep of our homes and our families, it must be recognized and valued. We have to understand that the labor of women is so crucial to the functioning of the economy. I mean, women can no longer be exploited and ignored. And I think it is our collective responsibility to ensure that each one of us commit to working towards correcting this reality. I guess I believe that it is our moment to make the kind of breakthroughs that so many women have been fighting for decades. I think we need to work with our allies, our partners, and our communities to once and for all end this heavy and gross reliance on the exploitation of women in care roles. And this discussion, I think, really is a step on the journey towards winning real and lasting change and making significant advances for women in care work. But we have to be honest with ourselves. This fight isn't going to be easy because there are many, many powerful voices who benefit significantly from keeping women down. But nothing worth fighting for has ever been easy, and women in our union are no strangers to tough and difficult situations. So I would just close by saying that, with crisis comes opportunity, and I look forward to working with the women in our union and our partners to finally end the abysmal working conditions and the lack of respect for women performing care work all across this province and in our country. Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Great, thanks for that inspiration, Candace. Connie, final thoughts?
Oh, I think I agree with Sister Candice. This is our opportunity, but really to look deeper on race issues, because as I said, care work, home care, PSWs, many people in doing this kind of work are women of color. And if we're going to talk about, women empowerment, we can't leave our sisters behind just because they've got dark skin, they are immigrants, they are women, they are sisters. We've got power collectively, regardless of how the systems want to divide us. We can stand together and end this, and it needs to end. We don't have to wait for another pandemic where we're gonna lose our sisters in the care industry because we didn't do anything. It's time to stand together, shoulder to shoulder, and do meaningful change. We can't let this continue to happen. It's painful, it hurts us. We can't let them take our power. Women movement has been in forever, and we can't just give up now. Social services, healthcare, they are underfunded, but you also know why. It's women who are working there. If you look at the budget for defense, for goodness sake, look at the budget for healthcare, for goodness sake. We can't lose our power now. We have it. We have to fight and support each other. Women must move the country. Women must move the healthcare. And we have the opportunity now, as Candice says. I like it because I belong in the union, but also there are people, many of us who are not organized, who are not unionized, who don't even know their rights. As we talk, they go to work without even a mask. We need to look out for those sisters. We need to bind together, fight together. That's all I can say. This is the opportunity. It's tough, it's scary, but it could be worse if we don't do nothing now. Thank you. And thanks for having me, please.
Thank you so much, Connie. You're so right. Gender justice is racial justice, is economic justice. It's all together. Thank you for your final thoughts. Over to you for your final words, Angela.
Thank you. I just want to build a little bit on what Connie was saying, is that when we underfund the public sphere, what happens is the richest among us can afford to buy replacement. And what that looks like in the care economy is the migrant worker program, the temporary foreign worker program, where people can hire people on temporary work permits to take care of children, and they're as home care workers or PSWs. And so those workers have the least rights of anyone because they can't even switch employers, right? And if their employer is unhappy with them, they're not only fired, they're deported. And so we need to start looking at those intersections and build a response that takes all of those people into account. Otherwise, we will be divided. And that's what capitalism likes to do with us, is divide us in order to conquer. And so in order to build that true solidarity and have that true understanding, of how this plays out in our lives and what types of solutions we'll need to build. I agree with Candace. The solution is to start organizing those workers and talking to those workers and bringing the protection of the union to the people who have been, I don't like saying vulnerable, but who are most vulnerable in this system that we've created, right? Thank you.
Thank you, Angela. And thank you for always explaining things in a way that is very interesting. Like sometimes when you hear about economy, you people might start to tune things out, but I find it a very accessible way that you explain things. So thank you for that. And Layla, over to you on final thoughts.
Thank you, Tiffany. I just want to end by saying that we know and we believe that we will have mandatory paid sick days in every province in Canada, and employers will pay for them, whether they like it or not. We know that employers will no longer be able to outsource their responsibility to temporary agencies, scrapping every dollar of profit they can from working class communities, leaving us workers vulnerable to weakened workplace rights and permanently low wages. We know that one day in this country, we will pave the way in a universal pharmacare program that will drastically lower drug costs for average Canadians and secure the next building block of Canada's public healthcare system. We know that it's only a matter of time. And my personal goal is to be part of this fight in any shape or form I can, along with my sisters, along with all of our allies, and see these changes come true, hopefully in my lifetime.
Well, thank you so much, Layla. That was just wonderful and a great wrap up. And Angela, Connie, and Candace, I can't thank you enough for joining us tonight on our CUPE Connects webisode. It was such an honor to share this space with you on the evening for a special International Women's Day webisode. And Tiffany, thanks for co-hosting with me. And to all of our audience, thank you so much for tuning in. Please continue to follow CUPE Ontario for more exciting CUPE Connects webisodes and updates.
Yes, thank you, Lori. It was such a pleasure to co-host. Our panelists were amazing. Can't wait to hear more from all of you soon. Have a great night, everyone, and happy International Women's Day. Take care.